Episode 10 is taken from Matthew chapter 2. Herod makes a plan. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? King Herod's face twitched and his shoulders stiffened. These were the only signs indicating the conflict within. His soul was angry, anxious, paranoid, a ball of tension and terror, a destructive, collusive energy that wrangled to escape. Sometimes it did escape, and the consequences were rarely constructive, especially for those closest to the king. He had watched the power struggle between a succession of Caesars as an edgy, nervous spectator. Finally, with the triumphant stamp of Augustus as head of the Roman Empire, Herod, the Idumean king, had stealthily changed his allegiance to back the definitive Caesar. Nevertheless, despite his royal appointment in Jerusalem, Herod never felt secure. The strange news that was rumbling around the palace and temple courts was that a hocus-pocus rabble of Eastern stargazers had arrived in Jerusalem with reports that they had seen a sign. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. The ruling priestly cohorts in Jerusalem did not hold much credence in signs, at least not these sorts of signs. Steeped in Jewish law, the movement of the stars carried little value. This was Judea, not some benighted pagan backwater. They would choose first and foremost what was and what was not worth following. They studied the law, and they were the ones who knew the signs, not some unsubstantiated migrant magicians who were just turned up unannounced, talking about stars and newborn kings. This sort of talk was not something the priests were prepared to waste time over. However, for Herod, their question touched a nerve. These were not words he could casually dismiss. Rather, they were a trigger, and their unintentional shot had hit the target. Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? Why would such a question be asked? This was what was eating away at Herod. There was only one king in Jerusalem, appointed by the Romans, and in his humble opinion justifiably so. Herod knew more than just a little bit about Jewish history. He was well aware of messianic prophecy. It was not the details that concerned him, however. What did concern him was any talk about another king. We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. They had come to worship him, not him, Herod the rightful king, sitting on the throne in Jerusalem, but some new king who, it seemed, unlike himself, he had to admit it, had been born to the throne. The question, where is the one, was bothering him to distraction. Just yesterday, the word had entered the palace court, slithering around the ears of Jerusalem's loitering principal players. King Herod did not like whispering. He was forever wary and watchful of any hints of dissension, and had gone to bed that night, his hissing, spitting mood a closely guarded pet. The next morning, the whole city was talking about these Gentile astrologers. Why had they come here? What were they hoping to achieve? Didn't they know that such talk disturbed the peace of Jerusalem? King Herod felt the urgent need to tackle the rumours on two fronts. Firstly, he intended to snuff out any emerging sparks of possible rebellion that talk of a new king might ignite. The tinderbox that was the diverse population of Jerusalem required decisive handling. And secondly, on a personal level, he desired to do more than just elbow out an upstart king. His heart was murderous, and although this was no secret, to achieve his ends he needed to practice deception, and for that he required information. With the first flush of dawning vigour, King Herod summoned a meeting of all the chief priests and teachers of the law. One by one they slid into the courtroom where they had been summoned. How to play the game with this king was something they were accustomed to. They knew his tendencies and his weaknesses. They were confident in their ability to maintain the balance of power within the walls of Jerusalem. He had summoned them all at once. This was slightly unusual, and although they weren't at first sure, they suspected that it had something to do with the stargazers' questions. In their minds, there was no reason to link the crazy ramblings of Eastern magicians with the law that they studied. In their humble opinion, there was no reason to be nervous, but the sharpest among them recognised that the king might not see it quite that way. Herod had not had a very good night's sleep. The patches under his eyes were deeper and darker than usual. They all noticed his furrowed brow as he marched among them, patrolling the room, distracted, pulling at his beard. In a way, in an unspoken, subtle way, they despised him. He represented a nasty and uncomfortable compromise between religion and state, between enemy, occupation and nationhood. Nevertheless, because he upheld their positions, they chose to respect him and turn a blind eye to some of his more ruthless behaviour. After the last priest and Sadducee, uncomfortable in each other's company, had slipped in, joining the gathering of Jerusalem's most learned, the king stopped pacing the room. Standing tall on the platform before his throne, he attempted to rein in the strong emotions that would devour him. His teeth clenched. He could not help the droplets of sweat that trickled down his face, but he had their attention, and that was what mattered. "So, this is what I need to know, and you are the ones to tell me." Their eyes narrowed. Swift sideways glances and the momentary raising of eyebrows were almost imperceptible. What was he going to ask of them? What new scheme had he planned? Depending on the question, how far were they willing to compromise? King Herod clarified his point further. "I need to know where the Christ is to be born." Between them they let escape an audible sigh of relief. The question was not a difficult one, surprising perhaps, from the king who usually left such matters to people like themselves, but not difficult. They knew the scriptures and all things relating to the promised Messiah. It was no trouble, absolutely no trouble, to help the king out with this little problem. They hardly needed to confer. They could answer with relish and impunity. "Your Majesty, the answer lies in Bethlehem in Judea. This is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler, who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Herod looked up and scanned their open faces. This is what he liked about Jerusalem. The people here knew their stuff. He nodded and murmured, "Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, it was just down the road." A plan was already forming in his mind. It had actually been forming for a while, but it was almost subconscious. Herod lived and breathed deception, but deception was only a tool that he used, a means to an end, and it was the end that, unbeknownst to him, his mind had already been working on. The cells, the building blocks of the plan, were rapidly dividing and multiplying. Soon it would evolve into something recognisable. After he had thanked and then dismissed the body of priests, he spoke quietly with only one or two royal advisers about the current whereabouts of these magi from the east. He wouldn't have asked the priests because he knew they were not interested. He got the distinct impression that they looked down their noses at the visitors. On the other hand, the advisers were eager to embark on this minor mission. They sent out their servants to search for the stargazers in Jerusalem's lodging houses and inns. Once located, the swift-footed servants were charged with passing on a secret message. King Herod would welcome them in his private apartment, on the roof terrace, at the palace. He would send guards to escort them under cover of darkness. Watching from his window, King Herod's gaze drifted upwards, finally succumbing to the lure of the livid blue-black sky, silent and strange, above Jerusalem. For hours now he had told himself that he did not need to search the sky for a star. There was no truth in it at all. A sign in the sky for a newborn king? Not possible. And yet, when his resistance had failed, he had looked up and had seen the blazing white spot overhead. Surely it was south of the city. If he had not known any better, he would have sworn it was hanging in the sky right over Bethlehem. He knew nothing about such things, and yet he was sure that if he were to glance up to the sky on a normal evening, he would never have seen this. Perhaps it was true after all. This was why he was waiting, anxious to speak with the Magi from the east. Ever since he had spoken with the priests and discovered what the Jewish scriptures said about the Messiah, he had taken measures to calm the paranoid storm rumbling within him. In his kingship he was proactive, and when measures needed to be taken, he had little hesitation in taking them. As the strategy formed, he felt once again as if he were the master of all things. However, the star in the sky taunted him. Its pure light was a weight, squashing him down, making him small, declaring him nothing. A sound, the scuff of sandal against stone, broke his reverie. In a way he was pleased. He could bear it no longer, the stars in the sky confirming his fate. Herod hurried outside onto his own private roof terrace. Not such a great idea, with the accusatory heavenly bodies staring down at him, but it was a lovely evening, and he did like to show it off once in a while. He positioned himself across one of the many luxurious lounges draped with crimson cloth, and awaited his enigmatic guests. Immediately he was struck by their demeanour and an altered mood as they stepped up onto his terrace from the small staircase. He wasn't at all sure what he had been expecting. However, it certainly wasn't this well-groomed, dignified entourage. The palace guards had already been prompted to allow them access, and they stepped aside, respectful in the face of what appeared to be a royal party. The king faltered for a moment, wondering whether he should just have given them an official audience at court after all, but that would not have fitted with the plan. No, he reassured himself, he was doing the right thing. Although Herod was king, he stood to greet them and was glad that he had thought to provide refreshments. They spent a good while beneath the stars, the glint of golden goblets melding with respectable royal chit-chat. Jerusalem, local politics, culture, the inconvenience of long-distance travel, and, eventually, their purpose in coming here were all topics they discussed. Despite his misgivings, King Herod wanted to know about the star, especially when it had first appeared. With the distinct feeling that he was managing to impress them, he pointed in the direction of Bethlehem. Embellishing the truth, he informed them that he had debated the matter in great detail with the highest of high priests in the city, and that after much searching and study they had between them discovered that Bethlehem was indicated in the promise. Almost through gritted teeth, he made a request. Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. Herod's rage consumed the palace. The word spread quickly, "Keep out of his way!" Everybody knew that somebody, and maybe quite a few somebodies, would lose their heads as a result of his flaying temper. It had been days in which he had grown increasingly volatile. Only those closest to him could guess the reason why. His secret plan to stamp out the rumour of a new king was dying with each passing day, with each empty day that the wise men from the east did not return to Jerusalem. At first he placated his restless spirit by giving the Magi the benefit of the doubt. Of course they would return. They had the manners and etiquette in line with royal dignitaries. They would not be so rude as to go back on their word. Nonetheless, as time passed, it seemed that they had, and Herod felt all the offence and outrage of a monarch snubbed. As these thoughts morphed into hideous proportions, like an old comrade, murderous anger filled his soul, and true to form another plan emerged. This time it did not rely on deceit, treachery, or secrecy. Instead, the king reverted to a strategy he knew best. How do you deal with a threat, regardless of how weak, small, or insubstantial it may seem? You destroy it completely. In his experience, he found that once an idea was in place, his explosive temper came under control. He was not an unreasonable man, he thought. No matter how violent he felt or how brutal the scheme, he recognised that there were limits. He would not go marching into Bethlehem himself, swinging his sword. He had soldiers to carry out that sort of noisy, distasteful task. However, the process still required careful thought. If the star had first appeared when the Magi had said, and he knew the distance they had travelled, and how long it had taken, then there was a very good chance that this baby was no longer a newborn baby. This baby, this boy, this proclaimed king of the Jews, could easily be a child. King Herod, in his wisdom, calculated that he could be anything up to 2 years old, so that would be the limit. First of all, Herod sent officials to Bethlehem so that he could gauge the number of soldiers necessary and how they could ensure that nobody slipped away. If possible, he would dearly love to find the actual child, but he knew that that would be very unlikely. If there were no definite leads indicating his whereabouts, then with all the facts he would give the order. His perfect plan would be set in motion. It didn't take long for the news burdened, wounded, dark with pain, weeping, terror and devastation, to filter back to Jerusalem. Those who were able did their utmost to stay away from the palace. This was by no means the first massacre at Herod's hand. It was just a few miles down the road. Its shadow left the people of Jerusalem shivering, even in the blazing heat of the day. The murder of children ghosted even the most mundane daily activity. The Jews, the priests who had studied the law, the very ones who, in their great unconcern, had spoken to Herod about Bethlehem's prophecy, now discovered that another prophecy haunted their thoughts. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more.